Welcome everyone to the first episode of Voices on Social Justice. This is an alliance created by the Constellation Center for Equity in Computing at Georgia Tech. It's aiming to amplify voices of innovative and compassionate experts on social justice. Given the current conditions we're all facing due to the impacts of COVID-19, we aim to be at the forefront of conversations regarding structural, racist, and sexist policies that have uncovered disparities in communities all across America. So we've created this platform to elevate the voices of forward-thinking and transformational individuals who collectively have been working to dismantle social barriers. Some of the topics we'll be featuring in the Alliance of Voices will focus on disparities in income, access to healthcare, and of course, equity in education. So again, welcome everyone. And today we are featuring a very special guest, Dr. Stephanie Rodriguez, Vice President of Policy and Engagement at AnitaB.org. We're very happy to have her. Prior to working at AnitaB.org, Stephanie was the Director of STEM Policy at the After School Alliance. This is a nonprofit supporting after school and summer learning across the nation. She is an immunologist by training, receiving her doctoral degree from Washington University in St. Louis, and then found her way to STEM education, policy, and advocacy through years of STEM-related community outreach and service as a AAAS Science and Technology Policy Fellow at the National Science Foundation. I think this is where we were able to connect, Stephanie, was when you were at NSF. And while you were at NSF, you worked on efforts to broaden participation in computer science and other STEM fields. And part of your bio also says you value the opportunity to support young STEM enthusiasts and the systems that encourage them. Again, I can't thank you enough for being our first guest. We're very happy that you're with us today. So just to get us started, I'd like you to maybe tell me a little bit more about your background and how, all of that led you to your current position at Anita B. I was fascinated by the fact that you are an immunologist by training.
Pretty timely point of conversation now. It's not always the case, especially while I'm at an organization at AnitaB.org that focuses specifically on technology and advancing women into positions of power in that really specific space. So I often would get a lot of questions like, why are you an immunologist doing technology? But now I'm getting a lot of questions of when will social distancing end? So to my roots of training. But to your question, Lynn, I mean, on a really personal level, I'm a Black woman who has benefited specifically from programs that are designed to encourage and amplify participation by diverse groups in the STEM ecosystem. I had my first research experience when I was a high school student, and the college lab that I was in, they had an NSF award to encourage them to bring in diverse youth into their labs. And so ever since then, I have been really actively engaged in this ecosystem that is working very hard to make sure that folks who maybe don't see themselves as scientists can start to see themselves as scientists. And so just for my own personal journey, have been very connected to the broadening participation in STEM ecosystem. While I was a graduate student at Washington University in St. Louis, I participated actively in the Young Scientist program, which was really designed to engage the local community in STEM engagement, whether that's students or teachers. And you just see how much power that brings people when you're creating knowledge and you're seeing how things you learn in school get applied to innovative practices and to solve real solutions. You see light bulbs go off. When you help young people get engaged in STEM, you also start engaging their families in STEM. And so that light bulb starts going off in their parents' brains, and you see the lights getting sparked. And I think that, from my personal journey, that's really how I ended up in this space. And, bench research is amazing, and shout out to all the immunologists whose work are so important now more than ever, as we're all having a virtual conversations as we keep each other safe by social distancing. And, all the more reason that these ecosystems of inclusion matter too. It's a little bit.
Yeah, that's well, gosh, I learned a lot more about you today in the last couple of minutes. I didn't realize that you had been involved in so many different organizations that really shaped, who you are today, and the opportunities, and the educational experiences that you've had. But let's set the scene here, Stephanie. Like, well, you and I are both in this position because we know that there are a lot of female students, women and minorities, that aren't exposed to these opportunities. So how are we doing, from your perspective, how are we doing in terms of women and minorities working in technology? And what are some of the, big challenges that women face in STEM right now?
Well, I think that women in STEM face challenges that women across all ecosystems are facing, and then they also face unique challenges. Because a big question to ask, how are we doing? I think the short answer is not good enough, right? There's still huge disparities across job levels, across training platforms around the inclusion of women and people of color. So, I mean, the short answer is we need to do better. But I think the full answer is that we continue to improve. And I think that we should all find some optimism in sort of all of the intentional efforts that from K to gray, right? The system from kindergarten all the way through work and learning and continued learning in the workforce. There's a lot of strategies being implemented to, one, collect data so that we're more informed about how we're doing in STEM and in the technology ecosystem, but then to also galvanize and advocate for action based on that data. And so at AnitaB.org, we're really pushing all of our corporate partner companies, all of our mission allies to really be thinking deeply about how they are collecting and evaluating data around inclusion in their ecosystems, whether it's education or work, and to address any gaps that they're seeing.
Mm-hmm. So in terms of, some of the data that you've received, or things that you've just observed, in the current conditions that we're in with, physical distancing, social distancing, what are some of the things that you're noticing that, have either helped increase the position that, women have to influence, different communities to prevail under these circumstances, and what challenges have you been seeing?
That's a loaded question, Lynn. I think that some of the so here are things that are working, right? Strategies that build mentorship and sponsorship, whether it's in learning or in work. Strategies that provide empathy and care as you're thinking about work schedules is especially important now, as folks are just that line between personal and professional and work and home is so blurry now, right? Some of us are sitting in our living rooms while we're on work calls. So whether we're in a world of virtual work or not, these strategies around flexible work and empathetic leadership and ensuring that there are clear pathways and on-ramps to get mentorship and sponsorship and advancement opportunities, those are always strategies that are effective in recruiting and retaining women and all folks, right, in these spaces where we want them to be very successful. Those things are harder now, but also more important than ever. So I think when you hear leaders talking about, we've never heard so many CEOs, right, talk to their workforces, for example, And the themes that we're hearing are what strategies they will be taking to ensure that work-life balances remain, but also that there is empathy and flexibility as we navigate this new space where we're trying to balance all of our personal duties and our work duties. So I guess if I were going to say the three things that are really effective are mentorship and sponsorship opportunities, empathetic leadership, and really being caring about flexibility as it relates to working environment.
I am really pleased that you mentioned, empathetic leadership, because I think, again, now more than ever with the working conditions that we're all facing, I think that is needed, like greatly. Empathetic leadership is something I think, we need to do better to cultivate in all aspects of the workforce.
I do think like in a way, right, this situation has really made people see the humanity in everybody that you're working with. We think about the data, right, around the elevated duties of housekeeping and childcare and family care that women are under. You're seeing a lot of all genders, right, participating in this family dynamic now on your calls. I think that this reality of balance is opening up all of our eyes to the essential work, paid and unpaid, that people in our communities do every single day. And that includes our family members, and it includes our colleagues who, they got 4 kids, but now you really know that they have 4 kids, and it just makes you appreciate their dedication, right, to their lives and their work. But it also puts a human lens on it. And it also has brought in some people who maybe weren't involved in those duties, those caregiving duties, more into that reality of what it takes to balance care and work. So I think in a weird way, it's opened up a lot of eyes.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. So let's get back to your work at Anita B. I would like for you to share a little bit more about Braid and the top companies for women technologists. What do they do, and why is it important to have initiatives like them?
Yeah. So I think this goes back to your other question that I maybe didn't answer, which is like, what are some of the challenges? So to take a step back, at AnitaB.org, we're a global nonprofit. Like I said, we work to advance women into positions of power throughout the technology ecosystem. And the programs that you mentioned, Top Companies for Women Technologists and Braid, Building, Recruiting, and Inclusion for Diversity, are 2 of our longest standing data-driven research initiatives that focus on the promising practices to build inclusive environments, whether with top companies, and that would be the inclusive environments in the workforce, or with Braid, we're talking about inclusive environments in undergraduate computing departments. And in both of those studies, the strategy is really to use data to inform how leaders are creating cultures of inclusion in their ecosystems. So with top companies, companies participate in a deep data analysis of their hiring, retention, and recruitment practices. We also look at their corporate policies. So that is where we learn a lot of the strategies that I mentioned around mentorship and sponsorship and flexible scheduling and empathetic leadership. That's the research study where we are able to learn more about these practices that are helping companies recruit, retain, but really importantly, advance their technical women. We're really proud about Top Companies, especially because it's one of the only studies that focuses on the technical workforce specifically. And sometimes when we're looking at data around occupations and work, all those things get lumped together, and then we try to sort of make assumptions about what's happening to different sectors of the workforce. And so really looking at technical work is very important to us. Similarly with Braid, we're really proud to have a longstanding partnership with research team out of UCLA, led by Dr. Linda Sachs. And their team, we've been conducting longitudinal analyses of 15 undergraduate computing departments in collaboration with their department chairs, looking at 4 commitments to build inclusive campuses. And the research starts to understand students' decision-making processes as they decide whether they will join and continue in computing education. I'm
Wow.
really excited to sort of announce, that at all 15 of the Braid schools, we're seeing enrollment of women outpacing overall enrollment trends, which if you're imagining a graph, would be the only way to close that gender gap in terms of a lack of women being represented in campuses.
Yeah, that's amazing. How long have these initiatives been in place?
So we're in the 6th year of the Braid project and the 8th or 9th year of Top Companies, I believe.
That's awesome. Okay, that's awesome. That's great. So, given the context and a little bit more information about these initiatives, I want to tie in that work with, how this could potentially launch us into a more technological and futuristic workforce. How likely do you think that is? And will this be an improvement for women and minoritized groups? What are your thoughts on that?
I think it does. So I am a firm believer in you measure what matters and then you take action. And so I do not think that there is a system in which we can imagine that we will see the results we're looking for in terms of diversity and inclusion in these spaces if we're not looking at the data that tells us how we're doing. And we can't do sort of, pay to ignore the data, right, is like a theme I think we see a lot. So it's great that you do the evaluation, but what are you going to do with the information? And so I think what those studies show us is, it's hard to collect that data. And companies, there's a lot of challenges and a lot of really complicated reasons, right, why you do or don't. But the reality is, I think this shows that when you do collect the data and when you do focus leadership's attention on making actions based on that knowledge, you can start to drive change. And so I think that is really what we're pushing for. What I would say I'm a little concerned with is that in a situation like we're in right now, priorities change. So it took a long time, right, to have a culture change where companies and education institutions were really thinking about their diversity, equity, and inclusion data. Now we're at a precipice where there's a ton of competing priorities. And what we don't want to see happen is that the focus on data, the focus on using that data to drive equity is downgraded in a priority setting. And so we've already seen this happen globally. It's starting to happen, right? Different nations are not collecting or enforcing different kinds of equity policies that have been in place to support communities. And that's because that's hard to do when the systems of work and education are changing in a virtual environment. But that also, to us, sounds the alarm that we need to be paying attention for any of these conscious or subconscious decisions that might backtrack us in terms of all of the equity progress that's been being made in the ecosystem.
Yeah, well said. And I think that's really, one of the big reasons why we wanted to create this Alliance of Voices, and specifically on social justice, because it is the policy aspect of the kind of work that we're all doing that, can really set the tone for, what happens next, what's going to happen next. So in your role right now, currently, Stephanie, as Vice President of Policy and Engagement, what are some of your thoughts on, how we develop policy moving forward that really drives out, inequities, inequalities, that drives out racism? What are some of your thoughts about how we do that better moving forward?
Yeah, that is in my mind one of the most important questions, and why our CEO at Anita Brenda Darden Wilkerson, even saw fit to sort of create a policy arm at our organization, which is to say, like, the single most important thing that we can do is use our voice. And I know that is the theme of this conversation that you're having. But Brenda hosted a conversation only a week or two ago with policymakers, including some staff from Senator's office and other leading voices in this space. And the takeaway message was, policymakers are moving fast. They use the information that they have on hand. And as citizens, whether it's in the United States or globally, it is our voices and our subject matter expertise that are required to inform the decisions that policymakers are making. And so in a time like this, when their attention is being pulled to really big urgencies, it's our duty to make sure that diversity, equity, and inclusion is seen as an equal priority as we navigate all of these immediate needs. And I think like you don't see that in any more specific way than looking at the health disparities of what communities are being most detrimentally impacted in the United States by the coronavirus pandemic. And when you see Black and Brown communities, specifically the African American community, unduly impacted by the pandemic, you start to look back and you see, right, all of the health disparities that are underlying the comorbidities, all of that are the underlying root causes of this undue impact. And that goes back to longstanding systemic racism, lack of access, inequities at an institutional level. And those are policies that are being under discussion right now, right? Our healthcare policies, our education policies. It's our big pieces of legislation that are the vehicles that all of our stimulus are being used, right, to support the community right now. So, I don't know, I think that was a broad way to say that there's a lot of levers, but the single most important thing we can do is make sure our needs are known and make sure that we're elevating that to our policymakers. And if you're involved in coalition-based work, it's really important that the coalitions that have overlapping messages are making sure they're delivering that consistent message to policymakers as well.
Exactly. I do think it's important to stay involved, with what's happening around your community, but also with your, politicians and your leaders at the local level and state level. You absolutely need to let them know what is needed and what is happening in your communities.
Before the pandemic was known to be a pandemic, I suppose. We had released a Tech Women's Guide to the Election, a toolkit where that we think elevates topics of interest to tech women that they could be using to elevate their priorities. This is an election year, up and down ballot. There are important issues on the line, and women who have subject matter expertise as women, but as technologists who can speak to issues of data security and data privacy, your voice is needed right now. And so AnitaB.org has some information if anybody out there is looking to think about, like, what should tech women be caring about? We have some ideas for you and some strategies.
I've lost video. I've lost audio as well, too.
Oh, I see you now.
Yeah, I lost a portion of your response there.
Oh, well, I was just mentioning, I think if I'm back now, I'm not sure where I cut off, but I was just adding, right, to your comments, Lynn, that before all of this coronavirus business was occupying our minds exclusively, AnitaB.org did release an election toolkit to help technologists think about the issues that might matter to them in ways that they can amplify their voice and subject matter expertise.
That's fantastic, Stephanie. We'll make sure to provide that information along with this interview as well. So I'm a little curious, Stephanie, about, this series is called Voices, and we'd like to know whose voice has been inspiring or motivating you lately, or who has been an inspiring voice for you.
Wow, I mean, there's a lot of inspiration around. I'll be honest, I've been inspired by young people a lot recently. I think that the energy I've been watching college kids, even younger, right, put into advocating for the issues that they care about, rallying together to change their maker spaces into PPE equipment creation spaces. Really just the empathy and the civic engagement has been super inspiring. And I just always think that we should be elevating young people as leaders.
Agreed, entirely. Agreed. They are the, next generation, right, that are going to be making very important decisions in society. Not in the not so long future, but Stephanie, I really want to thank you for taking the time to meet with us today and do this interview. I just have one last question for you. What's next for you? What are you going to be working on next in your current role? And how can people connect with you if they wanted to connect with you?
Yeah, please connect with me. You can connect with us through all of the AnitaB.org communication channels, especially. And we have some exciting work coming up for the policy team at AnitaB.org. We're really excited to be working just to elevate some get out the vote actions in terms of making sure those in the STEM community don't forget about their role in this change process. And we're also really excited to be diving deeper into how we elevate subject matter experts at the intersection of technology and policy. So we've been doing that through some of our leadership speaker series, like I mentioned, and we're really excited about that work moving forward as well.
That's awesome. Well, I absolutely look forward to continuing to work with you and stay connected with you. Thank you so much for your time for this interview and for sharing your voice in this space. And it's important to hear, a variety of voices, but I think you lend an especially acute voice to how women in technology and minorities in general in STEM can persevere through the challenges, and there are resources that are out there to elevate those opportunities. So thank you very much for doing that. You can find more information about Anita B at AnitaB.org. You can also follow Constellations on Twitter at GT_CCEC. We'll have more information about this interview on social media as well, too. With that, thank you for listening in.
Thanks so much for having me, Lynn.